They say when you marry the love of your life, you also marry their family. For Sarah, marrying Mark felt like entering a fairy tale. Mark was kind, successful, and deeply devoted to her. But every fairy tale has its hidden thorn. For Sarah, that thorn was Eleanor, Mark's mother. Eleanor wasn't a monster in plain sight. She didn't scream, she didn't throw tantrums. She was a master of a much more dangerous art, the subtle art of passive-aggressive warfare. From the very first day Sarah stepped into Eleanor's grand, pristine suburban home, she felt the invisible line drawn in the sand. Eleanor loved her son fiercely, and in her eyes no woman on earth, especially not a modern, career-driven girl like Sarah, would ever be good enough to take her place. The friction started small. Comments wrapped in sugar, but dipped in poison. If Sarah cooked a beautiful dinner, Eleanor would taste it, smile tightly and say, "Oh, it's so brave of you to try this recipe, dear. Mark has always preferred my traditional pot roast, but I'm sure he'll get used to this." If Sarah bought a new dress, Eleanor would remark, "What a vibrant color. I suppose it takes a certain kind of confidence to wear something so loud." Sarah tried to let it go. She smiled, she bit her tongue. She told herself that Eleanor was just lonely, a widow whose whole world revolved around her only son. But the tension was a slow-burning fire, and Mark was completely blind to it. Whenever Sarah tried to speak to him about it, Mark would laugh it off, saying that it was just how his mum was, that she didn't mean anything by it, and loved her. But she didn't love her. And the quiet war was about to escalate into an all-out battle. The real trouble began when Mark and Sarah announced they were expecting their first child. What should have been the happiest time of Sarah's life turned into a nightmare of boundaries crossed. Eleanor didn't ask, she demanded. She chose the nursery theme, she bought clothes Sarah hated, and she constantly criticized Sarah's health choices, saying that in her day they didn't worry about all those silly organic diets, that Mark turned out perfectly fine, and that Sarah was being overly dramatic. Sarah's patience was wearing paper thin. The house felt smaller every day, suffocating under Eleanor's constant gaze. The boiling point came on Thanksgiving. It is a day meant for gratitude, but in Eleanor's house it was a stage for dominance. Sarah had spent 3 days preparing her family's traditional stuffing recipe. It was a recipe passed down from her late grandmother, the one thing that connected Sarah to her own roots during a difficult pregnancy. She proudly placed the dish on the beautifully set dining table. An hour later, when the guests arrived and everyone sat down to eat, Sarah looked across the table. Her stuffing was gone. In its place was Eleanor's signature dish. Sarah felt the blood rush to her ears. She stood up, walked into the kitchen, and found her grandmother's dish sitting on the counter, untouched, covered in aluminum foil. Eleanor walked in behind her, wiping her hands on a towel. Sarah asked why Eleanor took her dish off the table. Eleanor was calm and dismissive, telling Sarah not to make a scene because her stuffing looked a bit heavy. She didn't want the guests to feel uncomfortable. And Thanksgiving dinner at that house had a tradition where they stick to her menu. Something snapped inside Sarah. Months of swallowed insults, ignored boundaries, and silent tears rushed to the surface. Sarah told Eleanor that this wasn't about tradition, but about control. She said that Eleanor had tried to control her marriage, her pregnancy, her home, and now she was throwing away her family's memories. Sarah declared that she was Mark's wife and the mother of his child, asking when Eleanor was going to realize that she did not own him anymore. The kitchen fell dead silent. Eleanor's face hardened, her eyes turning into chips of ice. Eleanor asked how Sarah dared to speak to her like that in her own home, saying she built this family, raised the man Sarah slept next to, and that Sarah was just a guest in this family who would do well to remember her place. Sarah didn't yell back. She walked out of the kitchen, grabbed her coat, and left. For the first time, Mark saw the fracture clearly. He followed his wife, leaving his mother alone at her perfectly set, traditional table. For 3 months there was a cold, iron silence. Sarah refused to go to Eleanor's house, and Eleanor refused to apologize. Mark was caught in a brutal crossfire, torn between the mother who raised him and the wife he chose. Then the baby arrived, a beautiful, healthy baby boy named Leo. Having a child changes everything. Sarah hoped that the birth of her grandson would soften Eleanor's heart. And for a few weeks, it seemed like it did. Eleanor came to visit, holding baby Leo with tears in her eyes. Sarah allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. Maybe, just maybe, the war was over. But the peace was an illusion. One afternoon, Sarah had to run to a quick doctor's appointment. Mark was at work, so she reluctantly asked Eleanor to watch Leo for just 2 hours. It was a test of trust. When Sarah returned home early, she opened the front door quietly so as not to wake the baby. She heard Eleanor's voice coming from the nursery. She walked toward the door, intending to smile, but stopped when she heard what Eleanor was saying to the 1-month-old baby. Eleanor whispered to the baby, telling him he was a true family member now and that Nana was going to make sure he was raised right. She said his mother didn't know the first thing about taking care of a real home and was too busy with her selfish career, but Nana was there to protect him from her. Sarah's heart stopped, then pounded with a ferocious rage. This wasn't just annoying mother-in-law behavior anymore. This was toxic. This was an attempt to poison her own son against her. Sarah walked into the nursery, took Leo out of Eleanor's arms, and pointed directly at the front door, telling Eleanor to get out of her house right now. Eleanor tried to tell Sarah not to be ridiculous because she was just talking, but Sarah cut her off. Sarah said she heard every word, that Eleanor could disrespect her all she wanted, and she had endured it because of Mark. But Eleanor would never use her son as a weapon in her twisted game. Sarah banned Eleanor from the house, stating she would not see Leo until she got professional help and learned what respect meant. When Mark came home that night, he found Sarah packing Eleanor's things that were left behind. She told him everything. For Mark, it was the ultimate moment of truth. He could no longer pretend to be the mediator. He had to choose. That evening, Mark went to his mother's house alone. We don't know exactly what was said behind those closed doors, but for the first time in his life, Mark stood up to Eleanor. He told her that if she didn't respect Sarah, she would lose both her son and her grandson. It has been a year since that day. Eleanor and Sarah do not live in perfect harmony. They probably never will. They don't celebrate holidays together, and the relationship remains distant. But a strange kind of peace has settled over them. Why? Because the boundary was drawn in stone. Eleanor realized that Sarah was not a temporary guest in Mark's life. She was the anchor. And Sarah realized that she didn't need Eleanor's approval to be a good wife or a wonderful mother. Life isn't always about forcing people to love each other. Sometimes it's just about teaching them where their boundaries end and where your life begins.